Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on how to address unique holiday challenges for retail. From PlaceIQ, we have Drew Brunig, our head of strategy here to take you through our data and findings. We are also very happy to have our partners from Experian here with us today. We have Lester Hull, Vice President of Retail, who is here to share some really interesting buying information. So let's go ahead and get started. Drew?
Thank you for joining us today. My name is Drew Brunig. I'm the EVP of Strategy here at PlaceIQ. That means I lead our data science and reporting teams and have been closely monitoring how social distancing in our kind of post-COVID life is affecting shopping and just consumer behavior across the entire United States. Before we dive into some of the more specific results of social distancing, let's take a look at our story so far, our macro story of how the last 6 months have played out as we've kind of waded through social distancing and COVID. We've been through 4 very clearly distinct phases and find ourselves in kind of a weird half stage at the moment. The 4 stages we've been through are the panic and prepare phase. This was the phase that kicked off on March 11th and lasted about 11 days. This kicked off when the NBA decided to suspend its season and Tom Hanks announced he was recuperating in the hospital. These 2 cultural events on March 10th really brought this reality home to everyone that COVID was going to be something that we had to deal with. As that happened, basically as a nation, everybody ran out to go to grocery stores, big box, dollar stores, and pharmacies. In fact, grocery traffic was up 50% during this period. But everything else just fell through the floor. Traffic plummeted. In some cases, categories fell over 90% of what their normal 2019 traffic is. On this chart, you're seeing an array of foot traffic to categories, all of which is compared against their 2019 norms. The dotted black line in the middle is what normal traffic looked like for the last year. So as traffic kind of moves down and up relative to that line, we can see how traffic is falling or recovering. In the panic and prepare phase, if you weren't part of that cluster of big box grocery that was associated with preparation, you fell fast and far. But grocery and big box was not far behind you, and it fell too as we entered the second phase, the quarantine routine. For these 3 weeks, we attempted to stay inside as much as possible. As you can note, every category spends most of its time during this phase below the line and is flat. We aren't seeing a lot of people going out or doing much of anything at this phase. And this remains true for 3 weeks. We tried to stay at home as much as possible. It's hard to think back to this period, but this was kind of the most uneasy period when really no one knew what was going to happen. We didn't know how serious COVID was. We didn't know how it spread. We weren't wearing masks, all these things we just did not know. And this lasted for 3 weeks until Easter. And Easter functioned as a holiday which kind of drove us outside. We tried to create some semblance of the holiday, and as we went out, we saw things were still open. And we started to see, have some traffic to essential or existing open retailers, and we started to see things spike up. So that orange line in the middle where you see that spike, that is fast casual restaurants, which were open more than casual restaurants for pickup. And were part of how people prepared for Easter. They went and got big meals and took them home. When people realized they were going to be stuck at their house for a while, they saw a huge increase in traffic to home improvement stores like Home Depot. The quarantine project is real. People did a lot of work in their backyards, worked on sourdough starters, and repainted rooms. And then in the middle, you can see that kind of green line that breaks out and starts to rise up pretty quickly across the Reemergence Ramp. This is nature and outdoor venues like beaches or parks. When people realized gyms weren't going to be reopening, they kind of shifted all their activity to outside. Easter kicked off the Reemergence Ramp, where we saw a steady climb in traffic for about 2 months. This was maintained until we started to see cases spike in Florida, Arizona, and California. When that happened, the Reemergence pumped its brakes and we entered the summer slump. Traffic fell pretty quickly and just kind of remained flat. We had a few spikes due to July 4th, as you can see right there, but overall traffic was pretty flat. We've started to see an end to the flat traffic at the end of the summer slump, but it's very, very slight. In fact, I'm drafting an email note right now about kind of this phase after the summer slump. You do see a big spike here for Labor Day, but I caution you not to read too much into that. That's actually an artifact of the way that our index is built and the way Labor Day fell this year. We're comparing kind of the fourth Monday of 2020 to the fourth Monday of 2019. And usually that's great. Holidays line up pretty well. But this year, the Labor Day fell 1 week later than it usually does in the calendar year. And as a result, we're comparing a holiday weekend against a non-holiday weekend in 2019. So if you remove that big spike right there, it's actually a pretty slow climb up. It's about, I would say for some of the more volatile categories, we're seeing only a 5 to 6 point climb over the last month. Now, if you squint your eyes and take a look at this, there really is kind of three major clusters of behavior that we see taking place here. And I'm going to, if I go through each of these categories and kind of sort them into three categories, and those categories are the things that were recovered back to kind of their 2019 normal traffic, and they kind of stay there. If virus counts go up, they stay at that normal traffic. If virus counts go down, they stay at that normal traffic. These are the things like grocery stores and pharmacies and big box retailers. They're not going to, exceed what they're doing, but they're also not going to fall. Here we go. So here we've clustered these groups into the resilient. That would be fast food, grocery, home improvement. These businesses that have remained open throughout the quarantine, and they have figured out how to do business. So if you have kind of, major spikes, we still see traffic flat to these guys, meaning, as you can see, they've established a benchmark near their 2019 traffic, and it's pretty resilient even throughout the summer slump. They kind of stay very close to it. At the other end of the category, we have those venues that are still empty. If the virus goes up or down, it doesn't matter. People still don't go back to these venues yet. These are things like hotels, airports, offices and workplaces, gyms, entertainment venues. They are generally still empty, and it's going to take a while. Go back one more. It's going to take a while to for those to kind of climb up. As you can see, they have made some recovery. They're up 20% from where they, or 20 points compared to where they were, at the height of the quarantine routine, but they are still pretty significantly depressed. In the middle, we have the vacillating category. This is kind of the canary in the coal mine. This cluster of groups are things like casual restaurants, are things like shopping malls. What defines these guys are they are either unable to or unwilling, because of the economics, to really adapt their stores to kind of the era of social distancing. So this is a little bit like a good example is an indoor mall. These were, where I sit in California, were actively closed due to statewide legislation, are starting to open back up, but they only are able to open back up when the numbers are down to certain levels. So this category kind of follows the diagnosis, and it's not just legally. People also tend to avoid these things when the numbers are up. So if you go to the next slide, we can see exactly how these categories break out: the still empty, the vacillating, and resilient. It's important to keep these categories in mind because these categories are going to dictate how the ecosystem or the retail ecosystem is going to react if virus numbers come up in certain regions. Right now, we have some case counts rising in a handful of states, and we don't know what's going to happen to those case counts, but we can tell you what's going to happen if those case counts continue upward or if they fall. And what's going to happen is the still empty will remain empty. The resilient will remain resilient. They'll stay open and they'll stay up at the top. And then the vacillating is going to go up and down with the mood and the diagnoses. These guys are the guys who are going to float up and down. This is important for holiday planning, and it really helps you from a flexibility and a regional marketing perspective. Because if you're trying to drive to, in-store shopping, you need to take these shifts into account and plan for them regionally or even at the county level as they start to go through. So before we get into kind of how you can become a vacillating or a resilient category, because there are some rules that we see, and I'll come back to that. Let's take a look at how the retail sector is faring if we break out the retail sector into different slices. So we've got several different categories here. This was on the previous chart, but I'm just doing this to kind of make it a little easier to read. We've got big box, grocery, dollar stores, home improvement, malls, and pharmacies. One of the things that is a big takeaway from the for the holiday is that malls are the big category in this section, which finds itself always in the vacillating category. As you can see, it's the line that kind of doesn't look like the others. It falls more when there's a downturn and raises more when there's an upturn and makes up that ground. We'll be publishing some more insights about malls in our newsletter this week, which we encourage you all to sign up for or check out at placeiq.com. Malls are heavily dependent on kind of what the mood is at the time, and they are going to have a factor in holiday planning. In fact, we expect a good amount of purchases that can be made at venues like big box or dollar store or even home improvement to shift there if we do continue to see an impact in malls. So if you are someone who has your products being sold in a wide array of stores, definitely seek out promotions or co-op or drive to store in those venues that remain consistently open and consistently visited, namely big box, dollar, home improvement, and more. If you are driving traffic to malls, be aware that local conditions are going to impact how much visitation is taking place at the mall. But this right now is just reflecting visitation, and visitation counts at the national level. But one of the things, if you dig into the numbers and look at what's happening when you kind of behind the averages, behind the national or the category level averages, one of the trends that we see continually is that even as visits return, as they start to reemerge, they are fundamentally different than they used to be before COVID. And we can see this by looking at not just visit counts, but at the qualities of visits, specifically duration of visits. Looking at how long someone spends at a venue is a great clue to see how behaviors are changing at the venue. Sometimes they've changed radically during quarantine, but what we like to watch is how they start to return to some new equilibrium and whether or not that equilibrium is the same as it was before COVID. To give you an example of this, let's take a look at Five Guys. Five Guys is a fast casual, burger joint. It doesn't have drive-through, which means that we kind of keep it outside of our fast food category. And fast casual restaurants are really interesting because they have fundamentally changed their business and shifted almost their entire customer base into takeout dining. Now, we have seen a slow reemergence of on-site dining, but it is still nowhere near what its pre-COVID norm was. And the way that we can see that is we basically bucket the visits that we see to Five Guys by how long the visit itself was. So what you're looking at here is a trend line by day, and it is looking at the trend of kind of the duration. And each line here represents a different bucket of visits. And if you were to total all these lines up, they would equal 100%. So a good way to read this is if you look at that light purple line near the top, that is visits that are 2 to 10 minutes. So this is a good example for a pickup order. So you order at the spot, you wait, you pick it up, or you call it in and then you go pick it up. Pre-COVID, this 2 to 10 minute slot was about 23% of all visits to Five Guys. A healthy percentage, but it was still, not the majority. That was 15 to 30 minutes, the yellow line. However, once we snapped into the quarantine routine, this percentage of visits nearly doubled to 40%. Quarantine routine, Five Guys was hugely dependent on this pickup audiences, whereas visits that were longer than 15 minutes plummeted significantly. As you can see, the orange and yellow lines just took a shot downwards. As the reemergence ramp returned and things started to thaw a bit, we started to see more diversity of visits. We started to see that yellow line come up. However, there's still a big gap between that purple and yellow line. the kind of what it looks like now is not the same assortment of visit durations that we saw at the beginning but like of the year before COVID. So we look at how this changes and shifts for fast food or fast casual, and we can see that it ends in a different place than it started, reflecting that the type of visits that are occurring have changed. Now, this is super important to understand for retail as well. If you go to the next slide. For retail, one of the things that is really interesting to us is that previously we used to see in commerce, most visits to venues or most commerce to places like Best Buy, which we use as an example here for a few special reasons, were in store. Most traffic was in store, and then there was some e-commerce that ranged from 10% to 20% of the total revenue for that retailer. However, in the post-COVID time, we've seen digital services start to shake up the assortment of how business takes place at retailers. One way this changed is we saw e-commerce rise dramatically. The second thing that happened is we saw a hybrid model emerge with some, and it had kind of had been there all the time, but now it started to gain traction, and that was the click and collect model, where you order online or on your phone, you then drive to the store, you park, you either run in and grab it and come out, or you pop your trunk and someone drops it in. This is actually how I pick up my groceries every week. I order online, drive there in a few hours, they drop it in the trunk, everything's awesome. With Best Buy, we can see this assortment changing as well, diversifying among these three different types of kind of shopping styles: in-store shopping, click and collect, and online. So if you look at this chart, one of the things to note is that if you focus on the quarantine routine and quarantine routine first, we can see that there is a sharp shift. The 15 to 30 minute trips plummet, as do the 30 to 60 minute trips. They plummet. We see a rise in that light purple line, which is the 2 to 10 minute trips. These 2 to 10 minute trips are the click and collect trips. These are people ordering things online and then picking it up at store. They park and they're there for roughly 2 to 10 minutes. We also see that 60 plus minute trip skyrocket. And the reason that skyrockets is because, at least during the quarantine routine and the Reemergence Ramp, that is actually employees. And the reason for that is that it's such a large share of visits is because there were very few people visiting Best Buy at this time. Best Buy actually kept its retailers nationally closed for much longer than some of the competition. In fact, one of the reasons we highlight Best Buy is because it had such an interesting Reemergence Ramp. Best Buy did a hybrid model for a while as well, when it realized that it was losing out on large appliance purchases to venues like Lowe's and Home Depot, who were having themselves a hell of a quarantine. As what happened, so basically Best Buy said, we will open slightly, but we will require online reservations. You actually had to go online and reserve, and they would meter how many people could be in the store at the time. When this occurred, we started to see that yellow line, that 15 to 30 minute and 30 to 60 minutes, start to rise, and they rose slowly. But at the end of the Reemergence Ramp, you can see a switch, and this is a 7-day lag, which is why that switch is spread over 7 days. When that switch occurred, that is when Best Buy opened its doors to the general public without online reservation, and people snapped into it. One of the things that's been very fascinating to watch, and is a huge takeaway for you all, is that people actually adjust very quickly when the rules change. I am continually amazed at how informed people are throughout the United States, both as to the numbers, but also to the different shifting rules. With that, we started to see the return of 15 to 30 minute trips. However, certain trips were still kind of impacted. We still started to see 60 minute plus trips are way less than they used to be. And we're starting to see that 2 to 10 minute trips still up a good 5 to 6 points more than they were. So the types of trips have diversified quite significantly. And we expect this diversification, the click and collect, online ordering, and physical in-store shopping, to remain diverse throughout the holiday season. This is one of our big takeaways. Now, coming back to one of the things about what makes someone a kind of resilient store or a vacillating store, Best Buy has managed this well. They used to be a vacillating store, and now they have shifted into the resilient store. And the way they did it, and the way everyone has done it, is the same 3 different ways. And we see this in every single category. If you go to the next slide. Across this entire period of social distance, we see 3 things that are associated with success. And those 3 things are being cheaper, being closer, and being safer than the competition. Consumers are trading down, given the recession environment, for more affordable options. Even if they're not directly impacted, a recession mindset has settled in. So we see lots of different companies offering kind of trade down or value-driven options. This isn't, you don't have to be cheap. You just have to be kind of more value-based than your opportunity or than your competition, and give consumers an option to trade down and feel like they're making a smarter decision because savings rates have gone up and disposable income budgets have gone down. The second thing is to be close. People are preferring to stay closer to home since they don't have commutes which are taking them further away. We see less destination shopping and more shopping within 3 to 5 miles of their house. Again, this means that big box stores are going to have a great holiday, both because they're already resilient and have remained open and have their safety and close practices down, but they also are convenient locations positioned near most homes. Finally, being safe is huge. People, may not care about complete safety, but there's a wide array of kind of risks that people are willing to take. And safety has become table stakes for 80 to 90% of the audiences out there. You have to talk about what you are doing to ensure that you are, aware of what's going on in your store, tell them about the steps you're taking. And we're seeing places that have these kind of measures built in or easily accessible continue to thrive. So how does this play out in retail? There's the obvious ones like big box and grocery being more resilient than indoor malls and outdoor malls. Well, outdoor malls are actually pretty resilient. We'll be sharing some data with that we just pulled this week. And that is because of that safety mechanism and perceived safety mechanism. But we can see this actually playing out really well in the dollar store segment, this be cheap, be close, and be safe. If you go to the next slide, here we're looking at traffic to dollar stores, and we're looking at Dollar General and Dollar Tree. And we're looking at their actual normalized visit volumes, and the dotted lines represent their pre-COVID averages. So what you're looking at here is how far above the pre-COVID average each respective line is. And you can see that Dollar Tree has fared fairly well. The purple line is basically back where it needs to be, hovering right around its dotted line. But Dollar General is actually slightly above it. In fact, it's almost 15 to 20% above its pre-COVID norm. So it's not only resilient, it's actually gaining ground. There's a couple reasons for this, but if you go in and look at their finances, and kind of what they credit it to, it really is the be cheap, be close, and be safe. We know dollar stores nail the be cheap model, but they also nail the be close model. Both Dollar General and Dollar Tree have spent the last 2 years building out retail sites in kind of markets that are unaddressed by other retailers. Communities that might have to drive 30 minutes to visit a Walmart now can just visit the dollar store in their town. But the reason Dollar General is excelling beyond Dollar Tree is because they've also started focusing on groceries in store. This falls into the be cheap the be close and be safe things, which is having a diverse array of goods allows people to consolidate their trips. We see trip consolidation happening all over the place. If people can take one trip to Costco, they'll do that rather than taking 3 different trips to kind of 3 areas. Trip consolidation is both a form of being close, but also being safer. People perceive this as having less risk. This is one of the reasons we expect big box stores to have a good holiday. They allow people to combine their grocery and kind of just home goods shopping with holiday shopping as well. And we expect Walmart, Target, and others to go on. So with that, given some of the delays here, I want to call out one more little effort to show you why we expect holiday to be on schedule this year. So if you look at holidays in 2020, one of the big things that was an issue with holidays is when Easter hit, we saw a holiday compression. Usually we see traffic kind of up higher as people prepare for Easter for the entire week preceding Easter. But this year we only saw it within a day or two ahead of time. And we saw this compression kind of reducing the total amount of visits driven by Easter because people were late to get started. However, this has normalized as we have learned to live with COVID. One of the things I want to show you here is what we're looking at here is big box visits, and we're looking at July and August. And as you can see, they start to pick up at the end. This is the back to school season. This is when people go to Walmart and Target to kind of get their back to school supplies. It's notable here that the 2020 visits are significantly lower, but it's interesting that they start up at the same time as they did in 2019. This bodes well. It shows that we are coming back on schedule for holidays. People are planning ahead. They aren't worrying about kind of the unknowns as they were with Easter. And we expect these changes to kind of bleed into holiday as well, especially given that Halloween and Thanksgiving are more kind of gathering and social holidays that we expect to have less prep for and more prep ahead for holidays. And with that, I'm going to skip the next couple slides to be mindful of time and hand the content over to Lester to talk about how consumer shopping has changed and what he's seen in the Experian data.
Hey, thanks, Drew. Very interesting and good to see some of those patterns picking up through back to school, although below those 2019 levels. What we've done with PlaceIQ, and you can tell through this partnership, is to kind of bring in some of the location data that they're seeing, and we have a pretty integrated partnership to also add it into some of the behavioral and psychographic information that Experian does have. And what we have on this slide here is we looked at, trying to get to some predictions that some of our retailers have asked about what categories are going to perform well in the upcoming holiday. Experian sits on a big transactional data set, aggregated into about 38 different product categories. And these are the ones that we see the biggest jump typically, historically, between October and December versus the rest of the year. So kind of the holiday shopping center time. Women's casual doesn't see a very big blip, but it's just such a big segment. We want to include it. So that's why it's got those 3 little stars there. Kitchen, home decor, electronics, books, and video games are ones that we're going to focus on here. But for those that are on the phone, we could look at your particular segment if you don't carry these and get you some sort of a reading. So taking that information, going on to the next slide, we looked at what the percent of online versus in-store sales were for these categories. Again, looking at what Drew had just covered, we're expecting to see a lot more online sales. And so where are we going to see the biggest lifts? And we thought that would be helpful for our customers to look at. So what we're looking at here is 2019, and you can see, like, for example, for women's casual, 86% of all the sales happened in store, with just about 13%. For books and video games, that's almost entirely moved, thanks to Amazon and Microsoft, almost moved entirely online. So, but it's good to note, we still think those are strong categories, and so you'll need to target those folks for online sales. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So taking that, we also looked, what categories do you focus on? We also were curious to see, was there any sort of pop or any insight on our Mosaic groups? And for those that aren't experienced with Experian, Mosaic is our attempt to take 19 overarching groups and looking at several things going down the right-hand side here: their household-based consumer lifestyle, 360-degree view of the customer, over 300 different consumer view attributes that drive this segmentation. So it's really driving down to some psychographic information as well as household income to put these people into certain groups. So that's kind of level set. If you move on to the next slide, you kind of get an idea of what, if those are interested in diving in, you can work with your particular sales rep on getting access to our segmentation portal. From there, you can see what these different segments fall into. generally who they are, what their financial status is, and so forth. So you can kind of see how we dig into that there. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so with that sort of level set for what mosaics are, we now looked at these particular categories. And so what we're seeing here pop is we're looking at in-store women's casual, in-store kitchen, in-store home decor as we go across the graphic, and then the percent of sales that the particular mosaic group consumed. And so you're able to look at, how much of your current client base, if you did an overlay, fit into these mosaics, or we do have ways to target either through our digital master that's out on a lot of the trading desk platforms, as well as into your own sort of targeting. And so Power Elite here consists of a pretty high percentage for in-store women's casual, and Power Elite you can think of as high household income, probably averaging 400K plus, booming with confidence. And you can see those two are very similar in as far as the overall percent of sales. And then you see a few changes as you go through. For example, when you get to online video games, that's going to shift into kind of the family union, autumn years, etc. So there can be some surprises there. But again, this is a way to kind of say, okay, if I'm in a particular category, what mosaic should I target, and to take a look at it that way for holiday. So next slide. So some predictions overall that, taking that, we see that, obviously, as we've discussed, the consumer health is going to be an issue. Regulatory, could be going up and down. We can use some of that information based on the situation locally, as well as economic conditions. So that sort of tees up, and then we can move on to the next slide. Combining, and what we try to do is combine the retail foot traffic index, again, that we've worked on with PlaceIQ, with this product channel index, and bringing in, how can we use it together to really make sure that we're targeting the right folks. The retail foot index is representing that consumer retail traffic from January and July relative to March, an estimate of how retail shopping behavior will be in that consumer segment. And then the product channel index is kind of taking what we just went through and putting it to an index so we can kind of see that side by side. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so what we're seeing here, again, like I said, using PlaceIQ's location data, we were able to layer in people that are making these visits into these mosaic categories. So what you see on the left here is not as significant. So this is probably one of the best performing segments. They're down less than 20% since that March, when we sort of went into quarantine. We have that dip, obviously, in March and April, where a lot of the stores were closed, but you can see sort of a lift again. So again, this is insight into who seems to be getting out and about by these mosaics, and again, a way to target heading into the holiday. So you see Power Elite and Flourishing Families are popping up here again. Pastoral Pride, which is the red line at the kind of the top of this chart. You can think of that as farming families, out in rural areas. They probably felt more confident, have felt more confident during this to getting back out into stores. On the other side, you see the ones that seem to be more conservative. They're not getting out as much. We've seen a continued downside of more than 25%. Have not continued to those pre-COVID levels. And so there might be, those might be just targeting a different message, trying to say, hey, we have online store, shop online, pick up in store, or just target them with online purchase messages. Again, so a way to vary your targeting as well as your message. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So we broke these up into sort of, with an index sort of in mind. The ones that seem to be least affected, they're most going out. In the blue here, index of 80, so that's the Power Elite, Flourishing Families, I sort of mentioned. Index of 75 to 80 are these categories here, and then below that, those are not getting back out to normal traffic levels, getting out of their house. Again, we can send that. So this is just kind of laying out the indexes, which I'll reference in the next slide. Okay, so now looking at the spending predictions, we're going back to these categories. And if you look at the bottom of this chart, what I have here is a side-by-side comparison. So we have the 2019 women's casual actuals. So it's in-store versus online. Online is in the purple and in-store is in that lighter purple, almost pink. And then it's comparing our prediction for women's casual. So you can see we expect a pretty, for women's casual 2020. So you can see we expect a pretty big lift in online sales for that particular category. Same can be said for kitchen, almost a doubling of that. So for those that have those products in your stores, or you focus primarily on those kitchen appliances, and knickknacks and so forth for the kitchen, we expect to see a huge spike in that category for online shopping. Home decor, also a similar spike, now going up to almost 92% will be online. And then the other categories for electronics, books, and video games, because they were already at such a high point of online, still important to market these. We'll see these categories have a huge lift over normal time for holiday gift giving, but they were already online quite a bit, so we don't see as much of a lift. So again, kind of the product categories we think that will sort of pop here. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So thinking about how we can meet these customers where they're at, we're sort of now combining the shift to online and then the product channel index. So that 15% point lift to online women's casual, 30% for kitchen. Just another way to look at that graph that we had before, kind of all side by side. And again, giving you some direction on which product categories to focus on and where we'll see the online pop. Okay, next slide. And now I've taken that one step further and looked at the mosaic groups that sort of overlay it. So this is kind of following down the analysis chain of now we've identified women's casual, have this high pop, high index for shopping, a very strong retail foot traffic index, and then broken down to the mosaics that you would want to target for that particular segment. You'll see Power Elite booming in confidence, partly because of household income, possibly also because of their jobs, maybe be able to keep them from home, but they still feel confident getting out, are going to be some of the number 1, 2s here. But then you'll see, we can go a little bit deeper, but for this deck, we've just talked about the top 3 for each of these. You can see some swap outs based on women's casual, kitchen, and here golden year number 3 and autumn years in number 4. Yeah, you can go on to the next slide. And then rounding out the other categories, this is a little bit hard to see. Again, we can share that, but you can kind of see the mosaic groups that we're recommending to target. You can trust me, they're going to follow the indexes and product indexes that we've had for home decor, electronics, video games, and books. And again, you see Power Elite booming with confidence kind of at the tops here, but you'll see some swap outs as you look into that third mosaic group, and then you'll see some changes as you go beyond that as well. And again, you can work with your sales rep or get access into our mosaic portal to kind of find some of this. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so taking some of that, we're going to go into some of the recommendations we have overall for holiday, and this is kind of a blended part of from what Drew's talked about and Experian kind of come together. So making the most of your holiday spend, first of all, knowing your target customer, know who's cut back on retail shopping activity, know who, some of these psychographic groups have stopped going into stores, or they still haven't returned to those pre-COVID levels. And this can help you prepare the holiday seasonal marketing programs. Number 2, it's going to be fluid, work with it. The location data that we have coming in is refreshed, and I know you can work with PlaceIQ as well to see if there's any changes in these mosaics. But right now we've seen a pretty steady level to that, but we'll keep an eye on that to keep it fluid. The competitive environment is changing. We're seeing retailers, deemed non-essential, competing with big box retailers. So you're going to be leveraging that stored traffic, and online search behavior can help identify the at-risk customers during the holidays. And then, look for the opportunities to make the unique marketing programs. If you're segmenting these, whether it's using the mosaics or tied in with that traffic behavior, changing that targeting, changing the creative, not marketing to everybody equally with some of these insights. So that's kind of the way we look at, those overall product categories that you should be targeting, the mosaics and how they've been affected by the COVID traffic. With that, I'll turn it over to Drew for some insights and recommendations from PlaceIQ.
So as we've covered, one of the big things here is that we're going to see reemergence and variety on the regional level. as you can see anytime. Go to the COVID tracking project or the Johns Hopkins dashboard, and you can see that virus counts are different at every different level, which creates these tiny little micro economies of people who are willing to take less and more risk based on their own demographics, their age, their income, or what's actually going on outside. Second, one of the other things that we covered today is that we see a diversity in the mechanisms that people use for shopping, whether they're doing in-store shopping, they're doing click and collect shopping, and e-commerce. The variety is more than it ever has been, and part of this is due to some people willing to take more or less risks, and you're going to have to meet your customers at their level. To help you do this, we've actually created some audiences that are defined by customer behavior. Couple ones that I want to point out on the first left-hand side is that we can look at active in-store shoppers from last year. So this is a good way to kind of find your general, who are the most active holiday shoppers from last year, and start to use them as a base level of your holiday shoppers this year. The second thing that is really helpful is we've been watching the behavior of devices for the last month or two, and we've started to build click and collect audiences that take into account how long people are spending at different categories of retailers. So reach out to your rep at PlaceIQ or just email sales@PlaceIQ to find out more about this click and collect audience. But we know which devices are essentially doing click and collect, making very short visits to stores that are offering click and collect. And we can negatively target that as well to find the people who are spending more than 10 or 15 minutes at these stores because they are actively participating in in-store shopping. Designing your shopping or advertising or messaging experience based on what channel these customers are going to be adopting is going to be crucial going into this. So please consider our click and collect audiences or our in-store shopping audiences. Finally, what we also have seen is that there's a wide array of risk taking depending on who and what people are doing. Some households are still strictly isolating, while others are going out and fully re-emerging. We have three audiences in our re-emergent audience data set: the strictly isolating, the cautiously re-emerging, and the fully re-emerged, which segment devices and household based on their propensity for doing things outside of their home. If you're looking to drive in-store trips, you want to be using these audiences to zero in on the people who are going to be most likely to visit your stores in person. That would mean reverse targeting click and collect and targeting those people who are more willing to step outside their house. For the strictly isolating, drive them online. Drive them into venues where you can accommodate the risks they're willing to take and offer them the services you have that are compatible with their desires. These audiences are crucial for adapting to the new shopper ecosystem of the holidays. So let's go to the next slide. So with these strategic audiences, you can basically do one of two things. Either limit your campaign to the people who are relevant to you. If you're reliant on in-store shopping and you're trying to drive those types of events, don't talk to people who are still strictly isolating. Don't talk to people who are adapting click and collect at a very large level. Talk to the people who are re-emergent, and talk to the people who are in-store shoppers, and talk to the people who were active holiday shoppers last year. That is a great way to drive efficiency. The other good way to drive efficiency is to tailor your call to actions and messages based on what the risks or shopping habits are for this group. If you are cautiously re-emergent and an in-store shopper, you might want to be talking about the safety measures you're taking at the store and the deals that are uniquely offered in store. If someone is strictly isolating and we are going to deliver them only e-commerce messages or home delivery messages, or maybe educate them about their click and collect. Use these audiences to tailor your messages and adjust your tactics for re-emergence. Finally, on the last slide, let's click over to that. We recommend the following three tactics for dealing with this crazy period of re-emergence. We are seeing a fracturing of trends at the county level, and so it's important to monitor these trends either using our dashboards or our data sets to look and see which counties are picking up for you and which counties aren't. We see incredible variety from county to county as things start to come back. Where I sit here in the Bay Area, we see incredible variety. When I go to Marin, it seems like stores are packed, but where I sit here in Alameda County, only select stores in select areas have full parking lots. We see these small microcosms because people are staying closer to homes, closer to their home, not commuting as much anymore. And as a result, one of the reasons that's great is it prevents the disease from spreading far outside of pockets and controlling it at the local level. Though this does have the effect of generating weird local ecosystems of shopping. Using our data allows you to track at the category and brand level the trends that are happening at the county level, which is incredibly powerful. So you can say, hey, I want to understand how Walmart is doing in the 5 counties of the Bay Area. And that's going to be a much different picture than if you're looking at rural Texas. The second thing is use our segments to take into account the risks people are comfortable taking and the ways they're shopping now. There are significantly different mechanisms for engaging with retail this year, and we are seeing an incredibly diverse array among e-commerce, click and collect, and in-store shopping. You need to meet your customers where they are already shopping and not ask them to step outside their comfort zone. It's going to be much easier, much more efficient, and much cheaper to tailor and match your services that you offer to them where they see fit. For many of you who are selling products at the retailers, not retailers themselves, this could be a unique opportunity to start to create a footprint of direct consumer business with those people who are least likely to visit retailers. Finally, measurement is a challenge in this area. Why is it a challenge? Well, the macro trends are so significant at this period. We are living in one of the greatest macro shifts that we will ever see in our lives, hopefully. And as a result, what happens is you can run an incredibly successful advertising campaign. But if, say, there was a spike in cases in a county or a state, your advertising campaign is going to get washed out by that dominant trend. We encourage anyone who is using our technologies like Place Visit Stream to compare this to what the local kind of truth on the ground is using our daily visit count metrics or other data sets which enables you to benchmark your campaigns against kind of what the headwinds are in each of your specific locations. So with that, thank you for spending time with us today. And we still have a few minutes if you have any questions you'd wish to ask either PlaceIQ or Experian for how to take on the holidays or what we're seeing in the changing consumer behaviors of this era. Thanks. And perfect. So thank you again for coming. We'll wrap up and follow up with you all afterwards. Have a good Tuesday, or what is it? Thursday. Long week. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.